Hey, I'm Caleb. Welcome back to my channel, and to another video. You may have noticed from the title of this video, it's not about an airplane, and it actually is about an experience I took on a riverboat several months ago, so let me fill you in, because it's been several months. The first thing I did was I headed to Europe. I took Lufthansa's Boeing 747-400 from Washington Dulles International Airport on December 19th of 2024, up in business class upstairs. That flight was really good despite losing my GoPro on the 747, and the video is live on my channel now. Then we landed in Frankfurt Airport, which was pretty cool, got a bus gate, which I was not sorry about despite every other passenger complaining, then made it into the terminal, where I boarded a Lufthansa A320 and connected to Munich. And arriving in Munich, which would be the subject for today's video, taking a luxurious riverboat cruise on the Danube River over Christmas, and the subject of today's video. Are 8 days in a luxury riverboat cruise worth it? I hope you enjoy the video. Welcome to Munich, Germany, on December 20th of 2024. The same day I flew in on the Lufthansa 747 to Frankfurt, and then connected on the A320 to Munich. Yes, it was an exhausting day, especially with the time zone change from the US East Coast, where I flew on the 747-400, until we got to Europe, which is on Central European time at the time of taking this trip. It was still a fun evening, trying some various foods, including spätzle, which I like. There was also a cheese shop, which was weird because, as an American, I've never seen a shop that sells nothing but cheese. This was cool, and one of the best parts of travel, in my opinion, is seeing new things. That's all the footage I took for the evening walking around Munich, and in the morning I managed to capture something pretty cool, a 747 freighter heading to Dubai. This was awesome. There were also chocolate-covered strawberries and various candied fruits. There was also a shop selling some things for the local soccer team, or football as they call it here, for FC Bayern. I thought this was interesting for sure, but not really my thing. Now talking my thing, we found a Lego store, which is always cool. In every city I visit, I try to find a Lego store. There was also a Lego Concorde. However, I unfortunately did not purchase one. Now that out of the way, it's time to head back to the hotel to get on board our bus to take us to the boat for the first day of the cruise, the second day of our trip. Here is the route of our trip we would be taking, starting off in Munich, Germany, and ending in Budapest, Hungary, going across multiple different stops over this 8-day trip, on board a riverboat cruise. And here's the ship we'd call home for the next 8 days, the MS Joy. The Joy is operated by Scylla, a company which operates the ship for Tauck, the tour company who does this tour. Let's check out the ship in more detail. There was an upper deck, which we didn't really take advantage of in the winter, given the cold weather, but you can see it here in this photo. It's quite expansive. There's also the panorama lounge, a dining room, and the main lobby, but you'll see these all in more detail as we actually walk through the ship. Actually boarding the ship took this trip to another level. This was just so cool, and my first time ever going on a riverboat. The ship was also festively decorated throughout, as this trip occurred over Christmas, which was pretty cool. From this view in the atrium, you can see the Compass Rose dining room, but don't worry, we'll check that out more in a little bit. This is where we would eat all our meals on board the ship, and there were many to come. Also up here in the front of the ship is the panorama lounge and bar, but we'll check that out in a little bit. Now to my cabin. I was in cabin number 301, which is a Category 5 room. There are different categories on the ship which mean different things. Here are the beds. There are 2 twin beds. They were pretty comfortable. A brochure, including some maps and information about river cruising by Tauck, which was pretty cool. A floor-to-ceiling length mirror, which many people would appreciate. Water bottles, listening devices so we could hear our local guides at the various excursions on shore, and a bathroom. The bathroom is like any other bathroom, and the cabin really feels like a hotel room. Overall, the room was really nice and felt very fancy indeed. If you didn't know this was on a boat, it would feel like a very upscale hotel, with fancy soaps and things like that. But pretty soon the ship pushed out of port, as we all were invited to head down to the dining room as we departed bound for Passau, our first stop. It was time for dinner on board the ship, which was quite an event. Here were the menus, and my choices highlighted here. I started out with some crab cake, which was pretty good, and this winter gourmet mushroom ragu, and an apple crumble dessert. The next morning we'd arrived in Passau, Germany, and it was time for an excursion. I chose the quote, holiday winter magic hike, as we left our boat on board a coach. The coaches would follow the boat by land for our various excursions at our various stops. This hike wasn't very magical, I'd say, but it was pretty cool. It was definitely interesting despite the rainy weather, and a part of the world I'd never visited before, as this was my first trip to Europe. This was really fun. What a beautiful town this was. By the way, this bell tower was part of a church, which was cool. After the magical hike where my socks were soaked through, I headed back to the boat, as did many others. I headed to Arthur's, the restaurant in the back of the ship, for a snack, some fried calamari, as we continued down the river, which was cool. 3 hours later, I went to have lunch. An assortment of German sausages, meats, pretzels, and spätzle, that delicious pasta I had in Munich. Also, since I was eating sausages, I figured I'd watch some TV.
Hey, I surrender. I'm a reasonable man. I know when it's time to fight back. Ooh, your hot dog is no match for my bratwurst.
Anyway, moving on from that stupidity, there was also dessert, which was pretty good, although I have no idea what it was. As we continued down the river, and officially entered Austria on December 22nd. We also entered the first lock of the trip. These were interesting, however, the locks were pretty slow, so I did not film more than this one. This evening we would continue our sail all the way toward Linz, Austria, where we would be docking for an excursion in the morning. Pretty soon some appetizers were brought around to us as we were seated in the panorama lounge, and then headed down for dinner. Dinner was pretty good, and after that I headed back to the bow of the ship, right in front of the panorama lounge, where guests can watch other vessels go by and get fresh air. It was cold, so I headed back inside the lounge. There were various gingerbread houses and other things on display here, and all these Christmas decorations, which were beautiful and very cool. Up here where the two gentlemen are standing is also the bar, kind of tucked away by all the decorations. I also decided to walk around and show you the front of the panorama lounge. As you can see, there are tables, candles, the bar off to our left. Out to our right is where the observation area is on the bow of the ship, directly in front of this area here. And it was just a pretty cool and relaxing place to hang out with a drink, or just chat with some friends. It was also very relaxing due to the jazz piano player, as you saw a moment ago, which was very cool.
Hi, Kellen, you know, we are on the MS Joy and we're going to have a joyous time over here. But tonight is karaoke night and I want to sing a song. But I want to give you a preview of the song that I want to sing.
Yeah, sorry mate. I'd play this song, but you know, copyright rules. This was a very fun evening, and as tends to happen, friendships were quickly formed. I also want to give a quick shout out to Brent and Kewen and all their family members for letting me hang out with them for a lot of this trip. Forming these new friendships made the trip even richer. And that's all I'm gonna play out of karaoke night, because I don't want to get a copyright strike. Anyway, it was super fun. The rest of the evening was also very relaxing, as we continued sailing down the Danube River, heading southeast. This evening probably had the best views of the entire trip from the river. It was perfectly dark out, which actually made the views better. There were lots of other riverboats that passed us, like this one here. I then headed up with my friends to the top deck, The views from the top deck of the ship were even better, without the windows to obstruct the view or make reflections. These are some truly beautiful views, despite the fact it was kind of cold. It also gives you an amazing recognition of the size and scale of the Danube River, especially here in Austria, at one of the river's brightest points. You can see the shoreline over there, and the water, which actually has a pretty strong current. Anyway, I'll leave you with a few more of these views before we head off to bed and it's time for the next day. This next day was day 3, as we were heading to the town of Salzburg. This was a very interesting thing, especially being on the coach where you can really see the scenery out the windows. There'd also later be an excursion to go see the chapel where Silent Night, the Christmas Carol, was written, but more on that later. We marveled at the scenery as we headed on the coaches, heading towards Salzburg, and finally arrived in the town of Salzburg. This was an incredible city to walk around and see, especially since, as I learned on this trip, Salzburg is where the very first Christmas trees come from, hence all the Christmas trees scattered about, as well as the horses and other various Christmas decorations. It was very cool to be sure. Also, I apologize for a lot of these static photos, as I took a lot more pictures than video footage. And there's Salzburg. Later that afternoon, there was an optional excursion to Obendorf, which is where the song Silent Night comes from, playing now, coincidentally. This was very cool, and had lots of history all about the song and it's being written right here, and how the song has gone across Europe, the Americas, and all over the world. This for me was probably the coolest part of the trip, to be in the place where Silent Night was actually written, a song I've heard on countless Christmas occasions. And as you can see on the map, here's where it is relative to Salzburg. Here is the famous chapel where the song was actually performed on the first Christmas it was written. This was very cool, and as I mentioned, I think was the best part of this whole trip. Anyway, I wish more people had come along on this excursion, as it really was worth it. When we got back on board our coach, we were given these famous Mozart chocolates, which were pretty good, as we drove through the cities and the Christmas lights, which were beautiful, all lit up right after sunset. Anyway, we got back on the ship, and then we had some more food, and I went to bed. The next day we explored even more of Austria, including this stunning building called Melk Abbey. It was very, very cool. It's a huge structure, as you can see by the photos here, and is a stunning Benedictine monastery, opened in 1089. The abbey, which was opened in 1089, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it was so cool to visit and see the view from up here. It also has many other features, like an impressive library, and the inside of this place is truly stunning. However, photos were not allowed in certain areas, so this is all I have to show you. Also, then Brent and I and a couple others decided to walk around the town while we had some time. I then went on another optional excursion, a wine tasting. This was pretty interesting. And of all the optional excursions, this probably had the most people take up the option to go on this trip. This excursion was interesting. The wine tasted like wine, which I don't claim to know much about, nor do I even like, and it was interesting. It was really cool to also hear about the history of how they make the wine and the winery. And perhaps more interesting than the wine tasting was seeing the cellar where they store all the wine. This was super cool, and this place was absolutely massive. I mean, you could probably fit 200 people down here. I thought this was more interesting than the wine tasting itself, especially seeing all the numerous bottles stored down here. I certainly did not expect such an expansive space, especially since so many other guests on the wine tasting also went downstairs to check it out. It was cool, literally cool, very cold, well lit, and shockingly in good condition for being so old. And then we headed back to the boat. As you can imagine, this entire week was filled with lots of fun excursions as well as fun things to do on the ship, including today's fun activity, building gingerbread houses and having a contest. My team did the worst of any teams, as you can see the winning house right here. Anyway, all kidding aside, it was really fun. I then hung out with Brent in the Panorama Lounge as we played a game of chess, which he lost. Good morning from day 5. This day would be all about Vienna, Austria, and seeing some of the incredible things to see. We drove in by coach like we did the previous couple days, and arrived soon at the Austrian Parliament House, which we unfortunately didn't visit, we just drove by. I would have loved to visit. Pretty soon we arrived at Schönbrunn Palace, and this was amazing. Schönbrunn Palace is another UNESCO World Heritage Site, and is amazing. Everything from the magnificent art to the actual gold on the chandeliers and the gold finish around the windows was super fancy and really cool. This place really felt like an incredible palace, and was probably the most royal and fancy-feeling stop of the entire trip. Also, for those of you who didn't know, Schönbrunn translates to beautiful spring. And that's a pretty cool fun fact. It's a beautiful name. Here are some more fun facts for those of you who have any interest. And then it was time to head back to the boat. Another highlight of today came this evening, visiting the Vienna Prater Amusement Park, which was really cool. This is one of the oldest amusement parks out there, and has the oldest continuously operating Ferris wheel in the world. There were lots of snacks and treats and things on offer, but I wanted to go see all the rides. Even though I didn't end up riding many of them, it was still super interesting to walk around and see all the sights. There were even bumper cars for some reason. I decided it would be interesting to see some of the rides up close, like the giant swing, which was pretty cool.
No way. You want to go?
And this was the world-famous Ferris wheel. This was really cool to see, especially since it was so old, being built in 1897. But I'm not really on board with the idea of riding a ride from the 1890s, so I gave this a pass. But many people rode it, so I guess it must have been cool. And I didn't film much more at the amusement park because I was eventually convinced by Brent to go on a couple of rides, including those spinning teacups, which were not super fun. Anyway, pretty soon we got back on the boat, and it's all of a sudden, through the magic of editing, the next day. The next day, day 6, we were discovering Imperial Vienna. This would be the day we'd walk around the city of Vienna with a local guide. In fact, we had local guides for almost all the stops to show us around. It was very interesting. Again, I apologize for not much video footage in some of these places. I just have a lot of photos. But anyway, here's a good video. This was walking through Vienna. It's a fascinating place, and some of those beautiful churches and cathedrals up ahead we'll check out in a little bit. Not only was it cool to explore a new city, but also being Christmas time when I took this trip, as I've mentioned several times now, really made the whole experience cooler. Here is one of these beautiful cathedrals. As you can see, the architecture is amazing. I think that has to be the best thing about churches and cathedrals in Europe. Also, the Boeing 777 in the background added to the effect. We even got to walk inside and look around a little bit. However, I did not record much video in there, because there were lots of people, it was kind of loud, and there was actually a service going on at the time we were walking through, I believe. Many of my fellow cruise mates thought this was the best stop of the trip, but let me know, what do you think? I certainly think it's a beautiful church, that's for sure. These beautiful buildings were even better with the perfect sunlight and perfect blue sky behind them. It was just awesome. And it made for some great photos too, with the light reflecting off different angles. Looking through Vienna some more, we came across some of these ducks, which were pretty cool, and I saw throughout the trip. There are also some very expensive watch shops, which I guess would be nice if you're into shopping for watches. I mean, these were literally everywhere. Breitling over there, Rolex over here, IWC in the previous slide. Very, very cool. And finally we came to the highlight. Not this hilarious sign, but this, the actual home to Mozart when he lived in Vienna. From 1784 to 1787, this was the home of Mozart, and it's now a museum. It's pretty cool. We did not go inside, but to see the house where Mozart lived was something that many people thought was particularly interesting. As I mentioned today, the weather was beautiful, and walking from the Mozart house back to the ship, I got my fill of aviation for the day. As we were in Vienna, which is basically in the middle of Europe on this trip, we were under many very busy flight paths. As I mentioned in a previous video, plane spotting is something I really enjoy. Anyway, the blue sky made it beautiful, especially this Emirates A380 off to New York City. That's pretty cool. It's now day 7, as we pull into Bratislava in Slovakia. Bratislava is also a very interesting city, and here are some fun facts about it, including that UFO bridge, which you can see in the distance now. Pretty cool. For those who did not know, Slovakia used to be part of another country called Czechoslovakia, which dissolved in 1993. When the two countries split their separate ways into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, we learned today that many Slovakians feel they got ripped off. Back in the good old days, Czechoslovakia used to be a Soviet state and part of the Soviet Union, but when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, and then due to a long stream of political issues, the country of Czechoslovakia decided to split in two, the Slovakians were really unhappy because the Czechs had the most of the money. After the split, the Slovakians became one of the poorest countries in Europe at the time. Nowadays, the Czechs and the Slovakians remain on peaceful terms. However, many older Slovakians still feel they have been dealt an unfair hand. Anyway, pretty soon we found one of those cool statues, deemed Man at Work. One of the statues I mentioned earlier, made out of bronze. Pretty cool. I thought that Bratislava was one of the coolest places I've ever visited. Anyway, there are still some fun things to see. I think one of the reasons I liked visiting Bratislava so much is because of all the history. As we found out later, there would be a medieval demonstration, so let's go check that out. One final note, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Russia all have very similar flags, as do many other countries, as this combination of colors is called the Pan-Slavic color scheme. Fun fact! This medieval demonstration was pretty cool. I was skeptical about it and thought it would be for little kids, but honestly it was interesting, even to those of us adults, and I thought everyone enjoyed it. It was certainly fun to see. You don't get to see many medieval demonstrations. Following the demonstration, it was time for some lunch. These were pierogies in front of us, which many of you probably know what they are, and they come from Eastern Europe. I also got some schnitzel and some potato salad. It was pretty good. I really enjoyed this. This was one of the occasions when we could have lunch in town, or have lunch on the ship. There were also some more interesting sights to see throughout the town of Bratislava as we walked back toward the ship. As I mentioned, Bratislava felt the most foreign to me, but I also thought it was really interesting. I always like seeing new things, especially all the foreign languages. This was pretty cool. When we arrived back at the ship, we got the best view we'd see this entire trip, as it was shining in the sunlight. There was also a Slovakian flag, as the crew put up a new flag for every time we entered a new country on this trip. Pretty cool. Here in the daylight you can also get a good view of the ship. Up there is the pilot house, and back there is the sun deck, which I didn't take advantage of because it was pretty cold. Up front is where we went to get those beautiful views sailing down the river. Below that is the panorama lounge, which we've hung out in several times now on this trip, and then the very front of the ship. This was very cool to see in the sunlight, and this, as I mentioned, was a good overview. On this day I decided to walk around the ship. Here's the very back and one of the lifeboats. Here are the stairs to go up to the main decks. And for those of you who care, here's the smokestack. I thought it was a cool picture because you don't usually see those on riverboats. Once I got back to my cabin, this was me seeing how fast I could get off the ship in the event of an emergency. Emergencies are pretty rare on riverboats, but I just wanted to know. So here I am leaving my cabin. You can see this is my cabin. The first thing I wanted to do was go out to the very front of the ship to see where the exits were up there. Here is me walking down the stairs, heading toward the front of the ship, stuff like that. I'll speed this up because no one wants to see it. Here is the panorama lounge that we've now entered. We're running. We get up to the very front of the ship here. We open the door. Here's the area where the bow is, up front to our left. And here's one of the emergency exit areas, at the very front of the ship, which took 44 seconds.
Alright, I just looked like an absolute lunatic for nothing but a video, but that's what you do. Now I'm going to go to the back of the boat, went up to the top deck. You saw I found the life rafts and the emergency area. Now I'm going to go back inside my boat and try it from my room to the back of the ship. Let's see which is faster. Alright, back in my room. Room 301 is a reminder. Now let's try this thing again.
And here you can see, here is the hallway with all the rooms in the ship. Again, I'm sorry this isn't the best photo, but it was actually a pretty good one compared to a lot of the time when there were many people in the hallways. Now here is Arthur's, where I've gone a couple times to get a snack in between the main meals. You can come here as much as you want, anytime, and it's pretty good food. For reference, it's where I got the calamari. Now here you are up on the top on the sun deck. Again, the sun deck wasn't used much because it was pretty cold, but there's a hot tub, a putting green, and it was pretty good. Pretty soon it was time to sail out of Bratislava and bid Slovakia a fond farewell, including that amazing looking bridge, as we headed toward our final port, Budapest, Hungary. And through the magic of editing, it's now the next morning. And here we are in Budapest, Hungary, the final stop on this trip. The building you can see here is the Parliament House, probably the most famous building in all of Hungary. This was the final stop on the trip here in Hungary. Unfortunately, I don't have many more photos of this beautiful city, because it was almost the end of the trip, and I had a lot more footage to take on my flights back home. But yeah, so this is Budapest. In order to get this beautiful view, we climbed up to Buda Castle, which is on a cliff overlooking the Danube River and the rest of the city of Budapest. This was pretty cool. This was also a pretty good day for weather, as it was probably one of the warmest days of the entire trip, which made it nice to walk around and explore the city. This footage here really gives you a scale and comparison of size of these pretty large riverboats, and then the size of the Danube River. Occasionally the riverboats park right down by the Parliament House, like in this photo here, or sail right by it. These were the types of views I was hoping we'd get. Unfortunately, we were parked farther away, so we couldn't see the Parliament House. Still, the riverboat with the Parliament House is one of the most iconic views out there in river cruising, which is precisely why I chose it for this thumbnail. Well, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this different type of video. If so, make sure to give it a like, comment, and consider subscribing to my channel. Additionally, if this looks like a trip you'd be interested in taking, I've left a link to the website below to Tauck Tours where I booked this trip. Anyway, but that's going to do it for this one. Until next time, I'll be wishing you blue skies and smooth sailing.